Thank you very much, Omar. And I guess first I want to say a huge thank you to Omar and his team at FOSIS for inviting me today. I can't express how much FOSIS is such an important and valued organisation, certainly by NUS, but much wider. It's an organisation that transcends just the issues that we're discussing today, quite rightly, because as pointed out, the issues that Muslim students want support and representation on transcend what we're discussing today. But nonetheless, it's important, it has a very important part in this current debate, and I think in referencing some of the earlier comments around Nick Clegg's unfortunate comments about a year ago, the government walk away from a relationship with FOSIS at its peril. And I'm very glad that NUS has such a strong relationship with the organisation. When I first came into office as NUS President 2 years ago, despite having been President of NUS Scotland before that, I had no real understanding of the impact of the issues that we're discussing today on Muslim students on a local level. Certainly with regards to London-based universities and their students' unions, some of the themes being explored at this event are part of everyday discussions for the officers that I work for. The last 2 years have been quite an education for me, to say the least, and I still wouldn't say I'm anywhere near being an expert in the issues that Muslim students face or the topics of tonight. But I do have some thoughts on the issue that I want to share, and so I thank you for giving me a chance to do that. I don't think you'll agree, in fact I know you won't agree with all my thoughts on this issue. At the very least, I hope that leads to an interesting discussion, if nothing else. It's a sitting down to think about what I was going to say on the subject, what was it quite challenging, and that's because on a day-to-day basis, this is a challenging debate for the Students' Union and officers that I seek to support. I have some caveats to say. First of all, I couldn't agree more with the comments that Carl and research that ACRE has taken forward. I do think that the press disproportionately give coverage through the lens of security and terrorism, and that gives no justice to the hugely positive impact of ISOCs across the country. But the issues that they are disproportionately representing are real issues for students' unions, and so I won't be apologetic in trying to deal with them up front. And my second caveat is many of the points I'll make and many of the issues I want to explore tonight are true of all faith-based societies. They are not exclusive to Islam or to ISOCs, but they are indeed things that these groups face as well. So on one hand, when you have right-wing commentators like Douglas Murray claim that every week radical preachers are invited onto campuses by Islamic societies, I know that the sentiment nor the statement is a true reflection of the discussions and debates that happen on our campuses. And it isn't a fair reflection in any way whatsoever of the amazing work that goes on in our universities by Muslim students and Islamic student societies. In fact, what it seeks to do is purposely ignore the wide range of excellent charity work and money raised by Islamic societies. It does nothing to talk of the campaigning, both in domestic and international human rights, that ISOCs undertake, and the pastoral support and care that Muslim students show for each other and the wider student community week in and week out is never given anywhere near enough airtime, and I think that's been very articulately expressed this evening. However, on the other hand, we also know that there are controversial speakers that are invited to campuses, and sometimes speakers do go to society events, not exclusively, but certainly sometimes to Islamic society events on campus, and say things that I do believe cross the line of what I consider acceptable. If they didn't, my organisation wouldn't have produced guidelines to support students' unions to deal with these issues of problematic speakers in 2011, guidelines that have been widely recognised as supportive of encouraging faith-based societies on campus, but certainly never looking to try and single out Islam as a problem. I was interested in some of the comments earlier about what particular ISOCs might face in terms of how those guidelines are applied or indeed not applied. In this situation, it's the role of students' unions to create an environment on campus where the rights of freedom to speech and the right of freedom from harm can coexist. We must allow exploration, discussion and debate on our campuses, but we must also support people to study, discover and investigate their beliefs and their faith with fellow students as they learn, grow and develop. And it's a crucial role that faith-based societies play on our campuses. Student faith societies have a long and proud history in the UK higher education establishments, and we should ensure that that long continues. And I encourage on a daily basis students' unions and their parent institutions to carry on making space for faith on campus. But, and this really does come with a but, like with everything in life, rights come with responsibilities. So when I hear reports of speakers that have been invited onto campus, or society discussions that express homophobic viewpoints, like that did happen at York a year ago and in Manchester just last month, I find it impossible to defend those that invited them, or the discourse that takes place at those events. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't legitimate debate, a debate that can happen on campus around faith and sexuality. It's a discussion I recognise from my own upbringing, and it's certainly not a debate exclusive to Islam. However, it is not acceptable on a UK campus to advocate the killing of people because they're gay. That has to be a red line. Stopping that isn't about silencing controversy, it isn't an issue of freedom of speech, it's an issue of hate speech on campus. Something I think that we all have a responsibility to face up to. I know that this is difficult, and I imagine that some people, if not in the room today, certainly in the student faith community at large, that will disagree with me. But just because that's a debate, it's not something that we can ignore. I want to give context to my next points, that I certainly don't think that what I'm about to discuss is an epidemic, but it is an issue. Student unions often find themselves in a dilemma when it comes to working with student societies and speakers. And whilst this is not exclusively an Islamic society issue, the truth is that not a week goes by without some students' unions across the UK getting in touch with me or colleagues for support. Sometimes the challenge in dealing with this is caused by the response of the institution itself. And whilst I know I can sit here and deeply value the relationship that UUK and Nicola has engendered with us on this issue, and we can sit here and agree on a likely response, the responses from universities locally can sometimes be vastly different. There are two universities here in London that are no more than 5 miles apart. One has buried its head in the sand while members of Hizb ut-Tahrir wander about openly recruiting students, and another has massively overreacted, has shut down dialogue with Muslim students and has banned Friday prayer. Both approaches are deeply unhelpful and expose a lack of consistency in which institutions treat this issue of speakers on campus. Students' unions, the organisations NUS represents, have been told in no uncertain terms by Charities Commission that they must ensure that they regulate who societies invite onto campus and speak at their events. They must be able to evidence that they are balancing the rights of freedoms of all students, and yet occasionally there is a lack of support from the parent institution to balance those freedoms, which inflame rather than smooth tensions on campus. Now, that is not to say that student unions get this right 100% of the time, because they absolutely do not. And some of our time is about challenging students' unions themselves to make sure that when they invite speakers onto campus and when they make decisions, it is a balanced response, it is an evidence-based approach, and they certainly treat it through the lens of welfare of students on campus, not on various views on geopolitics and conflating that with the religious beliefs of students on campus. Students' unions and universities need to be regulated to the same standard on this issue, for without that approach, it's students that are being let down. I know that NUS and UUK often work together on this issue, and the relationship has led to such an improvement of how we handle this situation, and I know it's something Nicola's passionate about continuing in terms of our approach and partnership. When I was reflecting what else to say on this issue, I tried to put myself in Omar's position and thinking about what the FOSIS team have to deal with and how I might try to seek to deal with those issues myself. And actually I came to the conclusion that we have lots in common in regard to how to deal with these situations. I am a leader of a broad organisation, and there is certainly not one ideology alive in the student movement. There are many. In general, the media also like to represent students in a very myopic way. And many of you might appreciate that if I was to listen to media, I would be led to believe that I somehow lead an organisation that is solely full of Marxist revolutionaries. And I know that, and I'm sure you know that is a crass generalisation and far, far from the truth. It might be a truth in a vast majority of cases, but it is not the truth. There are some student activists that are revolutionary Marxists. They are loud, they like to court attention, but there are many, many who are not. I see my role as president of NUS to ensure that diversity of what students and student activists is being represented by the media, a challenge we also find incredibly difficult. That means I have to challenge media stereotypes by promoting alternative views of what students can give back to wider society. And it also means I have to challenge and stand up both privately and publicly to those calling for revolution. Sometimes those revolutionaries say something that I might agree with, and I'll hold true to that. However, when they seek to falsely represent students more generally, or when, as does happen on occasion, they behave in ways that cross the line, I see it as my role to call them out on it. If I was FOSIS leadership, I don't envy the role that you have in FOSIS leadership, then that's what I would have to do. I promote the amazing and positive work that Muslim students across the UK do, and challenge the right-wing bile that is spouted by groups like Student Rights and people like Douglas Murray. But where people, student groups and speakers cross that line, then I'd have to stand up to that as well. I'd show leadership and remember that last FOSIS President Nabil was doing just this incredibly difficult task, and I've not had a chance to work with Omar closely as I'd like to yet, but I know that he and hopefully future presidents of FOSIS would seek to do the same thing. It's never enough simply to shout down or criticise our detractors, but to prove our work as representative organisations and to prove with the populace that our detractors are wrong. That is the real challenge, a challenge that is one that I think FOSIS have lived up to over the years. NUS is committed to student welfare, and safety of students' unions are key to promoting a safe environment for students, where they can go about their lives free from prejudice, discrimination and physical harm. Students' unions are at the heart of ensuring that our colleges and universities are places in which diversity of people and opinions are not only accepted, but celebrated. The range of activities and events that take place on our campus demonstrate this diversity of interests and should be encouraged and celebrated. Over the last few years, NUS has worked incredibly well with FOSIS and students' unions and their Islamic societies to try and strike that right balance. So I'd like to finish by saying that we should do much more to promote and reflect the overwhelmingly positive impact of ISOCs across the UK. We should reiterate the value of the relationship that NUS and FOSIS have, and one that I hope that governments stay true to. And I want to thank you for letting me be part of this discussion today. I'm more than happy when other speakers have finished to take points, questions and indeed challenges on some of the things that I spoke about this evening.